like a weightless rag doll inside a silk prison. She could barely keep her eyes open. Everything was blurred, shifting, like looking through warped glass. Somewhere outside the web, something was moving. Then, a sound. A crack, a rip, a dull, meaty thud. The world trembled around her. Another crack, another rip, closer this time. Ivy's sluggish mind struggled to piece it together. Something was tearing through the web. She could hear the fibers snapping apart, the heavy drag of something cutting deep. Then she saw him. Through the sticky gauze of the web wrapped around Ivy, a shape broke through the silken walls. Rough, solid, splattered in shadows and gore, it was Coop. His axe glinted in the dim, flickering motel light, the steel blade coated in thick, clinging threads. He swung again, the weapon biting deep into the webbing around her, shaking her entire body with the force of the strike. The spiders scattered, a shifting sea of legs and swollen bodies. Some skittered up the walls, vanishing into the corners. Others turned, furious, moving toward him. Coop didn't hesitate. He brought the axe down on the nearest one, splitting it in half. The body burst open, a dark ink like blood spraying across the shredded mattress. Ivy. His voice was hoarse and desperate. She tried to reach for him, tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. Her throat was thick with venom, and her limbs were dead weight. Coop grabbed her arm, yanking her free from the sticky mass. The moment she was exposed to the air, she felt them again. The hundreds of tiny legs skittering across her skin, burrowing into her clothes. They were still on her. Coop didn't waste time. He threw her over his shoulder and staggered toward the door. The floor was covered in webs, a thick carpet of silk and husks. The remains of Jerry, or Jason, or whatever his name had been, were propped against the wall of the room, wrapped in webs. The man's body was nothing but a hollowed-out shell. Now, the skin around his skull had collapsed inward. His eyes were gone, and his mouth was stretched into a permanent scream. Through her paralysis, Ivy's stomach lurched. Would that be what she looked like soon? Coop shoved the door open, kicking through the veil of silk that covered the threshold. The cold night air hit them like a shock, sharp and brutal against Ivy's burning skin. The spiders poured after them. Coop stumbled toward his truck, nearly losing his grip on Ivy as he threw open the passenger door and shoved her inside. He barely had time to slam it shut before the first wave of spiders hit the vehicle, their bodies smacking against the windshield with sickening wet thuds. They were coming fast. Coop wrenched open the driver's side door and climbed in, slamming it behind him. He shoved the keys into the ignition, and the truck roared to life. He threw it into reverse. The tires spun against the gravel. The spiders swarmed the truck, their bodies clinging to the windows, skittering across the hood. Long, spindly legs tapped against the glass. Coop floored the gas, crushing a wave of them beneath the wheels. Their bodies popped like overripe fruit, spilling dark juices across the pavement. The road opened up behind them, empty and endless, beneath the flickering motel sign. Coop spun the wheel, slamming the truck into drive, and gunned the gas pedal. Ivy slumped against the seat, her head lolling. The venom was still in her system, and she could barely keep her eyes open. And as the truck raced down the highway, the webs kept forming around it. Threads of silk stretched over the windows and windshield. Ivy felt something crawl up her arm. Her body shuddered, barely able to react. She turned her head with all the strength she had left. One of them was there. A plump, pulsing thing, its legs delicate and trembling as it climbed onto her shoulder. Its fangs dripped with venom as it climbed down her arm and onto the cup holder between her seat and Coop's. Coop swore. It skittered faster than any normal spider could and lunged at Coop, its tiny body stretching toward his throat. Coop swung wildly with one hand, barely managing to shove it off. but moments later it was already climbing up his leg again. His hand slipped on the wheel. The truck swerved, its tires screeching. Ivy could barely hold on to reality. The world was slipping sideways, turning black at the edges. Then, the spider lunged at Coop's neck again. Instinct took over. Ivy moved quickly, lifting her hand with every ounce of strength left in her, and crushed it between her fingers. The body burst in her palm. Thick, dark liquid oozed between her fingers. The moment it was gone, her body gave out. Her vision went dark. She felt herself slipping. Somewhere, far away, Coop was yelling her name. Then, nothing. Loomridge Haven was big, old, full of secrets. Walls creaked. The house was adjusting to its ever-dwindling population. The air was stale. Suffering had taken place here. It settled on Helen like fucking dust. The room the Loomridges had given her was cold. No matter how many blankets she wrapped around herself, she was freezing her ass off. The fireplace sat unused, and though she hated the cold, she had no desire to work up a flame. She didn't have the energy. Plus, she deserved to be freezing her ass off. The town of Gossamer Loom was supposed to be her fresh start after the breakdown that had nearly cost her everything, and she had convinced Robert that they needed to come. Robert had never really wanted to come. He had done it for her, and now he was dead. Helen pressed her palms into her face, but the image was seared into the backs of her eyelids. Robert's body slumped over her arm. His face emptied of all the love she had taken for granted. She had lost her mind, believing he was still there, dancing dumbly with him. Her own insanity had horrified her most of all. He had already been lost. "Were you kidding, Hal? You lost him long ago," she muttered numbly to herself. They had spent so many years fighting desperately for their marriage. She had told herself they were healing, that things would be the way they had been in the beginning soon, when they were young and still looked at each other with hope. But the truth is, she had been lying to herself, like a fool. "I was selfish," she thought bitterly. "And now I'm the reason he's dead. And the reason our baby girl is." Helen felt a raw, animal sound clawing its way up her throat, but she swallowed it down. She hadn't cried since the night they lost Leslie. She hadn't spoken much either. The Loomridges hadn't asked her to leave. Joseph, with his sharp tongue, and Lydia, with her condescending pity, hadn't suggested she go. They had even helped her get Robert buried as soon as humanly possible. Perhaps they were afraid of what she might do to herself if she had nowhere left to turn. And it wasn't like she could go back to Old Sam's woods. Her stomach grumbled. She'd eaten nothing for days, and now it gnawed at her. But it wasn't just hunger gnawing, it was the need to fill something. She wanted to make the hollowness inside her go away for a moment. She'd been ignoring the hunger pangs until now, but fuck it. What was she supposed to do? Die in this bed? Johnson girls were supposed to be survivors, even if she was the only one left. She whimpered. Then, Helen peeled herself off the mattress and pushed to her feet. Her joints protested. They were stiff from neglect. She moved slowly, her body feeling detached from her mind. The hallway stretched before her. It was impossibly long and lined with warped wooden panels, framed portraits and sculptures, and dim sconces that cast flickering light. Her shadow between the sconces stretched and shifted as she walked. The carpet beneath her bare feet was threadbare, rough against her skin. She hadn't paid attention to it before. Loomridge Haven had once been grand, but it had aged poorly. The deeper you went, the more apparent it became. The way the foundation had settled unevenly, how the wallpaper peeled at the edges, the scent of dust and old books, of something long forgotten. The air was damp, cool in a way that reminded her of the grave where Robert now lay. She swallowed back the ball of sorrow in her throat. The kitchen was a cavernous place. It was much too large for a home that barely had anyone left to cook for. The Loomridges sure as fuck never used it. They had meals brought to them, prepared in the shadows by, well, Helen hadn't quite figured that part out yet. Somehow, their house was just always taken care of, and their food was always gourmet. The refrigerator hummed. It was the only modern thing in the room, surrounded by countertops cluttered with tarnished antique kitchenware that had long been forgotten. She hadn't expected to find anyone here, so the sound of metal against porcelain caught her off guard enough to inspire a reflexive jolt. Helen stilled as she spotted the hunched figure at the counter, Josiah Loomridge. His shoulders were curled in, and his head was bowed low. His spoon scraped slowly against a bowl of ice cream. She saw the way his free hand trembled as he wiped his face and how his breaths heaved. He was crying. Something in her cracked. Because she knew this grief, the kind that made food taste like horse shit and left you raw and empty. Before she could stop herself, she took a step forward. Josiah heard it, and his body stiffened. He opened just enough for Helen to see his face. He had been trying to wipe away the evidence, but it was too late. His eyes were swollen, and his nose was red and runny. "Hey," he mumbled hoarsely. Then he sniffled sharply, clearing his throat in a pathetic attempt to erase the fact that he had been sobbing over the ice cream in front of him, which was now melting in the neglected bowl. Helen didn't say a word. She crossed the room, moving as if underwater, until she hovered on the other side of the counter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Helen went right up to him and wrapped her arms around him. Josiah tensed, and then he broke. His body shook as the sobs rippled out from his throat. His fingers clutched at her shirt, as if she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart entirely. Helen held him tighter. She felt the hot sting of tears pressing at her own eyes, and for the first time since Robert had died and Leslie had been taken, she let herself cry again. They stood there for what felt like forever, clinging to each other. Josiah pulled away first, rubbing at his face with his sleeve. I, he sniffled. But all of a sudden Helen wasn't listening to the boy's stammering. She couldn't, no. She shook her head. The reality of this grief was too great, and sharing it had made it too real for her. No, despair closed in on her, and for a moment she thought she would implode from the pressure of it all. But then someone was calling to her. She could feel him, thick in her veins, pulling her, urging her forward. "I need to go," she murmured. Josiah frowned, still dazed and recovering from her abrupt shift. "Go where?" She already knew. Robert. His name felt like a prayer. Josiah blinked with confusion. Helen? But she wasn't listening anymore. The grief had transformed into manic energy. She needed to see him, his grave, his name carved in stone, the proof he was gone. She stumbled backward, barely aware of Josiah reaching out as if to stop her. And then she turned and ran. The front door swung open with a wailing creak, and the night air slammed into her like ice. The world outside was damp with mist and populated with trees that loomed overhead, watching her sprint toward the graveyard. She didn't stop. She ran into the dark. Josiah stood dumbly, staring at the kitchen doorway Helen had just passed through, his hands still trembling from the way she had clung to him. He could still feel her grief. It had matched his own. They were both distraught over the loss of the same precious girl, Leslie, the new girl. And then, after the strangest hug, Helen was gone. It had only been a matter of seconds. The silence in her sudden absence was suffocating, and Josiah didn't trust it. Hadn't there been something unnatural in the way she had gone stiff before whispering her husband's name? In the distant gleam in her eyes before she ran off? Was it merely grief? Or impulse? Josiah wasn't sure, but he had seen Leslie slip away, watched her be taken, swallowed up by the schemes of that old, rotting man. Josiah and the others had stood there, utterly useless. He had wanted to intervene, to save the day, but his body and reflexes had betrayed him. And the last time he had seen her, she wasn't Emily anymore. Her body was a pile of twisted limbs and empty, horrified eyes. The girl who had been his first kiss under the bleachers at school had become nothing but scraps of flesh and snapped bone that had been used to trick Leslie into entering old Sam's house. His stomach twisted violently. Was Helen another victim being drawn into the dark? If she was, Josiah had to stop it this time. His limbs moved before his mind caught up, carrying him through the halls of Loomridge Haven with energized urgency. His first stop was the servants' quarters. Coop. Ifanyan would know what to do, it was him. Josiah pushed the door open, his pulse hammering. The room smelled of old wood and sweat. The sheets on Coop's bed crumpled but empty. His heart sank. Next Caroline, then Jane. He checked their rooms, barely knocking before pushing the doors open, hoping to God one of them would be there, groggy and annoyed, asking him what the hell was wrong. But their beds were empty too. The panic clawed up his throat. He tried to force it down, tried to keep it contained, but his thoughts raced. They were gone. He was alone. But wait, no, that wasn't true. He staggered toward the next door, hesitating for only a moment before shoving it open. Willie. Unlike the others, Willie was actually there, curled under a heap of blankets, breathing slow and deep, sleeping like nothing had happened. Josiah hesitated, his breath shaking, then grabbed Willie's shoulder and shook him. "Willie," he rasped, his voice barely working. "Wake up." Willie groaned, resisting at first, but Josiah shook him harder. Willie stirred, bleary-eyed, his brow furrowing in irritation. "What the hell? Helen's gone." Josiah barely recognized his own voice. I think she's going to the graveyard." Willie blinked, still trying to shake off sleep. "So?" Josiah gritted his teeth. "So, that asshole that took Leslie, he's still out there. What if he's the one calling her? What if she's..." Josiah's throat closed up. Willie sat up now, rubbing his face, trying to process. "Helen's a grown woman. She can. I watched Leslie get taken." Josiah cut in. His voice was too sharp, too raw. It was all hitting him at once. "We all watched her get taken by that old disgusting monster, and we didn't do a goddamn thing to stop it. I saw Emily's body." His breath was heavy, and he couldn't say the rest. Willie was quiet now, more awake and aware. I can't just let Helen walk into that graveyard like this," Josiah said, forcing himself to breathe. "I don't trust it." He swallowed hard. "I don't trust that something isn't waiting for her." "Well, if you're looking for someone to come with you, you got the wrong guy," Willie smirked. "I ain't setting foot in that graveyard at night." Josiah wanted to smack Willie on the head, but then he remembered how horrified Willie had been when they had gone to visit his family mausoleum. "Okay, fine. But I'm going with or without you," Josiah said definitively. "Without me," Willie mumbled. Rolling back over in his bed, Josiah exhaled sharply and stormed out of the room. The halls of Loomridge Haven stretched endlessly in the dim light, their dark wood walls lined with old portraits, the eyes in the paintings staring too long, too knowingly at him as he passed. The place always felt like it was listening, like it was waiting for something. Josiah walked briskly, his steps echoing. He peeked into the guest rooms. Empty. The beds were made, the sheets tucked too tightly untouched. Where the hell was everyone? Sure, Eli was probably sound asleep in his bedroom, but Josiah couldn't trust him with something like this. Why wasn't Coop in his bed? Or Jane? Or Caroline? Willie was the only one of the group left there asleep. Mere nights ago, that room had been full of people drawn together with a common purpose. Where were they all now? Josiah's fists clenched at his sides. He paced faster, his heart hammering, the familiar frustration bubbling up, mixing with his panic. He thought about when Ivy had left. How dare she leave? She had run the second things got too heavy, left them all to fend for themselves. Josiah hadn't been surprised, not really. She'd always been the type to look out for herself. But still, he had thought maybe she'd stick around. He'd hoped she wouldn't lose faith in the group so fast. And Willie, lying there, wrapped up in his damn blankets, not even pretending to care that Helen could be walking straight into a trap, Josiah gritted his teeth. He didn't want to be like them. He had spent his whole life trying to be good. The perfect son, the golden boy, the one everyone in town admired. His parents had built him into a prized possession, parading him around like proof of their success. The Loomridge name was solid and reputable, so Josiah was solid and reputable. But it never felt real. His older brother had spent his whole life resenting him for it, and they'd always been pitted against each other. Was it Josiah's fault that he knew how to win that battle? Either way, not only had he never known his older brother, he had never really known himself. Josiah stopped walking. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. What the hell was he supposed to do now? He wanted to be the kind of person who did the right thing whenever the fuck he could figure out what the right thing even was, at the very least. The silence stretched thick around him. The desire to do right burned within him. And then he heard it. Josiah? It was barely a whisper, but it curled through the hallway like smoke, soft and familiar. Come to me. Josiah turned sharply. His skin prickled, but there was no fear. The voice was old and scratchy, but not threatening. It knew him. It's you? His pulse slowed. It's meant to be you. Josiah took a step forward. There was something about the voice, something gentle, something safe. Then suddenly, his stomach twisted. His mind caught up with him, warning him. Old Sam did stuff like this. He whispered into people's minds. He played tricks. He made people believe they were safe when they were anything but. Josiah had seen it firsthand. The whisper in the woods, the voice that had led Leslie to befriend the creep. The puppet corpse of Robert, smiling like it still had a soul inside it as it drooped into lifelessness over the arm of poor Helen Johnson. This wasn't safe. Show yourself, Josiah stammered, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to have courage. Whoever you are. And then there was movement for just a moment. At the far end of the hall, Josiah could have sworn he saw something glowing. It was faint, like a flickering candle going out. For a moment, he could have sworn it was the flickering glow of an illuminated man. A man he'd never seen, but somehow, he had always known. His grandfather. Caroline hugged the wall of the corridor, trailing behind Jane with sluggish steps. The sconces along the wall cast grotesque shadows across the hallway. The flickering of the light seeming to mock the two women as they made their way back to the servants' quarters. They had tried in vain to summon Zachariah's ghost, and Caroline's longing for guidance had once again amounted to nothing. She wished she hadn't allowed Jane to get her hopes up. She had let herself believe that perhaps Zachariah's spirit might have granted them a sliver of guidance, or at least the faintest warning that might save them from the punishment the Weaver had in store for them. Instead, they had only been met with a maddening silence. Caroline cursed under her breath. "I'm sorry it didn't work," Jane murmured, voice subdued. Caroline shrugged. The air felt stale and lifeless, and she could feel the centuries of history Loomridge Haven's walls had absorbed. Tonight, the years of suffering that had seeped into its walls were especially palpable. Caroline's entire body felt drained, hollowed out by the futility of their circumstance. She wanted to say something casual, something that wouldn't give away her desperation, but she was too worn out for that. "I can't feel them at all anymore," she whispered. Jane's gaze flicked over her shoulder. "You mean the spiders?" She slowed just enough for Caroline to see the concern etched on her face. "You haven't felt their presence at all since the night we let Leslie get away?" Caroline's lips thinned and she nodded. "That's right," she said with a sigh. "It's funny. I spent years wishing they'd vanish." She could still remember those nights in the hospital. The sterile white walls, the restraints, the sedation, the cruel smirks of the orderlies who thought she was nothing more than a raving lunatic. The therapists who treated her like a case study rather than a person. And always the spiders skittering behind her skull. Whispering, whispering, whispering. I used to scream at night, tear at my hair, begging God to make it stop. But no. She swallowed. "I'd do anything to get them back." Jane touched Caroline's shoulder. "It was never going to be easy for you. You were always going to be a lone wolf, Caroline. That's the price you pay for the bond you share with the 8-armed woman." Caroline drew in a shuddering breath, trying to ignore a sudden, cold chill that had drained the warmth from her bones. "It used to be a bond," she corrected. "I remember when the spiders came to me as a child. Holy shit, Jane, it was amazing. I was better, stronger, wilder. That's how it felt. Like I had 1,000 eyes watching out for me. And I was never alone. Hell, I remember tearing through this town with their chatter in my head, like I was on top of the world. It was terrifying, but I was alive." Her voice wavered as she remembered how many nights she'd spent curled up in a hospital bed, wishing that very same presence away. "Now that it's gone, I feel like I'm living a half-life." Caroline took a breath. "And now I keep thinking she must have just made a mistake when she chose me. I guess I was just some random kid and the mother only thought I was worthy of her blessing or curse or whatever it is. But she bet wrong on me, and now she's gonna take it out on all of us." Jane nodded, but said nothing. They kept walking, rounding a corner to a hallway that opened into a broader stretch lined with framed portraits. Dust coated every surface. Caroline's heart lifted when she thought she saw a spider scuttle beneath one of the tarnished frames, but it was only a flicker of light, and soon her heart sank again. No matter how badly she wanted that connection back, it had been cut off for good. Jane slowed, wincing as she raised a hand to her throat. "Well, mistake or not," she said, her words tight with strain. "I get being set apart, believe me, I do." She hesitated, fingers skimming along a pale, jagged line just above her collarbone. "You see this?" Caroline paused, furrowing her brow. In the dim glow of the wall sconces, she saw a faint, silvery scar slashed across Jane's throat. It looked almost delicate from a distance, but as she peered closer, she saw how it tugged the skin into a crooked line. "I didn't know you'd been hurt there," Caroline said softly. Then it dawned on her. "That's from old Sam, isn't it? When he drained your blood?" Jane nodded. "For his ritual of sacrifice, this scar is the mark of his first twisted attempt to do to me what he is going to do to Leslie. That is, if... Jane trailed off. Caroline clenched her jaw. "If he hasn't already," Caroline finished for her. Hatred flared in her chest at the mention of old Sam. "That piece of shit." She swallowed hard. "God, Jane, what if she's already gone?" Jane grinned. "My throat's been sore, throbbing in fact since he got her. Each day that passes it gets worse. I think it's 'cause my throat is tied to the ritual he intends to complete, because it was my blood he spilt when he began the ritual." She wrung her neck gently with her hand. I think